Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I have a question for you. Most of us would agree that if we were to pay less in taxes, particularly on things that we absolutely need, like things to stay alive, like, for instance, our groceries, wouldn't that be a slam dunk? The reason I ask this is because not only do an overwhelming number of Idahoans support repealing the grocery sales tax, but we have a number of great legislators who have been working on this actually for quite a long time. And yet it gets very little traction thanks to legislative leadership. Why is it that it's so hard to enact a repeal of the grocery tax in the great state of Idaho? It really comes down to a question of who benefits when that tax goes away. I've got answers coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Every one of us feels the pinch. When we go to the grocery store, maybe it's even flat out sticker shock, but costs have risen dramatically and inflation is partially to blame, but there's also the fact that we are still taxed on our groceries and we're one of just a handful of states. I think there's maybe 4, maybe 6 states total out of all of the states that still tax groceries just like they tax everything else. Everyone else has found a way to somehow make it so you don't have to pay tax on groceries or things that are absolute necessities to live. But the question is, who benefits when the grocery tax goes away? Or for that matter, who benefits by keeping it exactly where it is? Well, we have a number of great minds that have been working on this, and I'm going to walk you through some of the analysis that is out there. And by the way, some of these are legislators. Some of them are policy analysts or those who are working in the cause of freedom. I'm going to give a shout out right at the very beginning to Brian Ullman and his Gem State Substack. He did a historic look at the grocery tax earlier this year. I think it was in early January. And I mean, it's a deep dive. He did a lot of research, a lot of old headlines, and really gave a good historical accounting of where that tax comes from, why it's in place, and what the grocery tax credit is all about. But I want to defer to something just a little more contemporary. This is from Idaho Freedom Foundation President Ron Nate, and it's the ancient myth of Idaho's food tax credit. Just to give you a little bit of background about how did this tax come to be. Now, first of all, Ron says, let's keep it simple. Taxing groceries is regressive and unseemly for a supposedly conservative state. And separately, income tax credits by any name are better left in place than forcing Idahoans to pay higher taxes. So he says, let's be clear, the tax credit in question, this is the grocery tax credit, has existed for decades, unattached in statutes to grocery taxes. Only when some legislators started pushing hard to remove the sales tax on groceries did other big government legislators react, and they dubbed the tax credit a food tax credit and then increased the credit amount to stave off what would have been a much larger sales tax cut for Idahoans. Isn't that tricky? But they probably made us feel good about it while they did it. So Ron's point here is that Idaho is a laggard. 46 other states either don't tax groceries at all, or they do so at a reduced rate, like Utah does. Besides Idaho, only Hawaii, South Dakota, and Mississippi still fully tax their groceries. Now, there's no justification for a red state to keep on taxing groceries, he says. We mustn't be fooled by some big spender's misdirection in renaming an income tax credit to a food tax credit. In its inception, and largely in its practice, the income tax credit many associate with the grocery sales tax wasn't attached to grocery purchases, or even grocery taxes at all. Since 2008, the tax credit was increased and renamed in a coordinated effort to keep the tax on groceries in Idaho. So the tax and credit system as it exists, he says, is clunky, it's unfair, but more importantly, it hurts Idaho families. So what do we do about it? Well, he says no conservative legislator would argue that dropping the sales tax from groceries is going to require us to raise taxes on income by removing a tax credit, whatever its name. So he says, here's an idea. We abolish the grocery tax. Perhaps the statute should drop the word food from the food tax credit and return it to normalcy, so to speak. But he says we shouldn't feel obligated to repeal the credit at the same time we repeal the tax. This may explain one of the reasons why they're having a hard time getting this to move forward in the legislature. It would make sense before 2008. Ron says it wouldn't make sense now. So let's work hard to repeal the grocery tax. Good conservatives shouldn't be fooled by an income tax credit getting in the way of repealing the sales tax. Now, he says, we at the Idaho Freedom Foundation oppose removing the tax credit because, simply put, we're not fans of raising income taxes on families. But the problem here is the legislative leadership isn't even letting this bill move forward. I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. Ron says, here's a side story on the totals. Some opponents of any sort of grocery tax repeal claim that the income tax credit offsets what Idahoans pay in sales taxes on groceries. So cutting or not cutting them is all a wash. But he says that's misdirection, and it's incorrect. The income tax for food generates savings for Idaho, but far short of what is collected in sales taxes on groceries overall. So the difference is about $200 million. Repealing both the sales tax on groceries and the income tax credit would change the win for Idahoans from about $406 million in tax cuts to roughly half that amount, around $200 million in cuts. These are estimates from the Idaho Freedom Foundation as well as the Idaho Legislative Services Office. Repealing the income tax credit, he says, is a separate issue. So it would only be palatable along with a commensurate reduction in income tax rates so that no families are left holding the bag with higher income taxes in the end. But boy, some politicians really are addicted to those taxes. And, well, if we cut someplace, we've got to raise the taxes somewhere else. Here's the bottom line that Ron says. He says, some legislators insist on linking the grocery tax repeal with the tax credit repeal because doing so would likely cause the entire repeal bill to fail in the legislature. Reason why? If we try to repeal both the sales tax and the tax credit together, well, most families in need would see an overall tax increase. So that's going to be a bill stopper. Some families get more from the tax credit than they pay in grocery sales taxes. They would be hurt by repealing both. Other families pay more in sales taxes than they get from the credit. They would be helped by repealing both. And he says, get this, some families pay virtually nothing in grocery taxes because they do their grocery shopping across the border in no grocery tax Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Montana, or Wyoming. But they still get the full income tax credit in Idaho. By the way, Senator Brian Lenny did a marvelous video using ChatGPT to kind of hash out what exactly would I save for a family of 6 if I just claim the tax credit versus if we repeal the sales tax on food. And it'd be a bigger savings by repealing the income tax, or the sales tax rather, on food rather than the tax credit. So first, Ron says the fairest thing to do is remove the grocery sales tax, period. Idahoans should not pay sales taxes on groceries while many others don't. But he says we can do even better. An entirely different bill, clean and separate from taxes on groceries. We should abolish the food tax credit and simultaneously reduce income tax rates enough so that no family's hurt by removing the tax credit. And he says this is entirely doable and it's beneficial for all Idahoans. And this is the part that I know politicians will find hard to stomach, but government already has plenty of our money, so let's not let them fool us into giving them any more. Now, I wanted to also dive into this from the standpoint of one of the legislators involved in this. This is from Glenita Zeiderveld. She is a senator here in southern Utah, and she is giving some of the reasons why Idaho's legislative leadership is refusing to let all 105 legislators vote on repealing the grocery tax and delivering immediate relief at the cash register from rising inflation. She says that's the $406 million question. But her point is that many Idahoans are asking the very same thing. Repealing the grocery tax would offer direct immediate relief, especially as inflation continues to erode purchasing power. Yet despite strong public support and multiple efforts by lawmakers, legislative leadership has repeatedly blocked a full vote on the issue. And she delves into some of the reasons why they might be doing this. One of the reasons that Senator Zeiderveld gives is revenue concerns. The grocery tax generates significant revenue for the state, and leadership may be hesitant to remove that funding source without having an alternative in place. However, Idaho's budget is filled with wasteful spending that should be eliminated before taxing essential groceries. So instead of burdening hardworking Idahoans at the checkout line, she says we should be focusing on cutting unnecessary expenses and prioritizing fiscal responsibility. Then you have the governor's opposition. Now, Governor Little actually expressed, or he campaigned on repealing the grocery tax, but he hasn't yet delivered on it. In fact, he's expressed a preference for tax rebates and income tax reductions over a full repeal. Now, some legislative leaders could be aligning with his position, which brings the question, okay, could the legislative leadership and the executive branch just be two wings of the same bird working together to block real tax relief for Idahoans? Okay, it's a fair question. A couple other reasons: backroom deals and priorities. Legislative controls which bills, leadership controls which bills get a hearing and a vote. And this is what's happening right now. They may prioritize other tax policies or even have political reasons to avoid a straightforward repeal. But instead of advancing meaningful tax relief, they push bills that offer mere bookkeeping for breadcrumbs, like those bills currently being sponsored by Representatives Monks, Representative Scott, Senator Anthony, and Senator Nichols, while ignoring the real solution, which is to fully repeal the grocery tax. And then there's political leverage. Keeping grocery tax repeal as a bargaining chip for future negotiations on budgets or other tax policies may be part of leadership strategy. Now, she says, I've personally witnessed the political games of holding bills hostage to push their own priorities through both chambers, rather than allowing a fair and transparent vote on real tax relief for Idahoans. I think at the federal level, don't they call that log rolling? In order to get my bill through, I'm going to help you with your bill. But if you don't help me, then your bill isn't going to get any help. But Senator Zeiderveld brings up something that I think needs to be understood on this issue. There are two kinds of representatives. There are those who work for the government and those who work for the people. This is one of those issues where it becomes much, much easier to discern which is which. Lenita says serving the people is far more challenging because it comes with intimidation and pressure, especially when we refuse to stay silent or we vote against expanding government, which are two of the ways that we can be heard on this issue. Contacting your legislative representatives or senators, or for that matter, working to remove via the ballot box those who are standing in the way of lessening government's footprint on you. She says, this is exactly what you've witnessed with those of us fighting to reject our pay raise and repeal the grocery tax, measures that provide immediate, tangible relief to the people. And I'm going to throw one more comment in here just because I thought this was a really worthy way of looking at this. This is from former IFF President Wayne Hoffman. And he says, to be very clear, people like me want to repeal the grocery tax. He says the reason that we want to repeal it has much more to do with the fact that people tend to die if they don't eat. So it's a moral question as much as it is an economic one. Now, he says groups like the Tax Foundation want states to keep taxing groceries because they're thinking states can depend on food taxation as a revenue source regardless of what's happening in the economy. All right, everybody's got to eat, so we'll keep those taxes coming in. But his point is well taken here. They tax the air if they could, because people have to breathe, and therefore the government can count on collecting the air tax. So the question that I'm going to leave you with and ask you to consider is, as you consider not just the grocery tax repeal, but any other issues that come before the legislature, are your elected representatives working for you, or do they appear to be working for the government? Funny thing is, once you think about it in those terms, it's not that hard to figure which side they tend to fall to. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.